It's one of solidarity, and it's on the back of Africa's successful African Union elections that happened last week. And I think that it's important at this time, when we're facing so many challenges in Africa, that we are dealing with the priorities that the South African leadership has set for us. It's an African agenda, but it is also one that is clearly connected to what the rest of the world will have to do.
Why does the G20, in your view, matter? Right? Why does it matter? What does the makeup of the G20 bring to the sustainable development agenda? And in the context of Africa and African countries, South Africa in particular, hosting this for the first time?
Well, it's born out of a crisis, right? It started with the Asian crisis. It was CBN governors, it was finance ministers, and then very quickly elevated on US watch, George Bush Jr., the G20 in the financial crisis that was in the States. That was a big crisis. The world came together to find those solutions. So for me, it really mirrors a multilateral solution to some of the issues that we have to deal with today. And there are crises around the world. We're seeing our COVID crisis that we're still recovering from, Ukraine still recovering from. And so for us, these issues of debt, the issues of inequality, all have to be addressed at the G20 in response to the financial challenges we have.
DSG, you will have seen the recent announcement by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio that he will be boycotting this meeting in Johannesburg, labeling South Africa's G20 theme. You mentioned solidarity, right? Solidarity, equality and sustainability as cover for DEI and climate change. What do you make of the posture from the United States, given the importance that solidarity, equity and sustainability means not just for the work of the G20, but the United Nations writ large?
Well, look, the United States leadership has always been important, and as I've said, the G20 came out of a crisis elevated to head of states when it was here in the United States. And so I hope that we will see Mark Rubio at future meetings. This is the first of many that will set the agenda. The US, as we hear from the South African government, will be present. I don't think that you can talk about cover for every human being with a right to have a life of dignity, and it's expressed in different ways. And for us, inequalities and poverty and the growth agenda, these are important issues. Now, if it's about inclusion, then every human being has a right to live that life of dignity, to have a right to health, a right to education. And I think that those are the things that we stand for, the principles, the values of the Charter. And so we carry that into our work every day. We don't cover anything. We are very clear about what we stand for.
And if you're right and they're wrong, what does pushback look like?
I think there have been people that have been right or wrong over the years. What you try to do is meet them where they're at and bring them to where you are at. At the end of the day, many of these resolutions, the Charter itself, all of this was in the United States. And I think that it's important for us to continue the engagement and for the US to see how important their leadership is. And if they have issues, then let's have a discussion. Let's engage. This is a huge family. It's not of one or two people. It's over 190 states. And that family is important. It's called the world.
In terms of financing for development, which will play itself out in this meeting, the G20, but also at the international conference later in Spain this year, issues of SDG stimulus, scaling up affordable long-term financing for development, climate loss and damage fund, tackling the debt distress for many developing countries. What worries you most about an agenda that has been so broad and it has been so difficult to really get broad consensus around?
There will always be, troubles in getting consensus, and that usually means the lowest common denominator. We've been too slow with too little too late. And we've not had the same hand that we've not had the same handshake for every member of the family in recovering from some of the crises that we've had. And so that worries me. It worries me that we get further behind in developing countries and yet be set standards that are higher than sometimes developed countries who have succeeded in having that net that they've been able to stand back up again. So it worries me that there are two standards. And I think that we have to have a fairer world. We acknowledge that the financial system itself, the architecture itself, was not designed for a world where we are all independent sovereign states today. It was in 1945. Many of us were not. And we need to revisit that. We need to reset. The pact was about that. It was a discussion to say 75 years on in the UN, so what? And the so what was the pact.
The pact of the future, right?
The pact of the future. Reinforcing the things that matter most, our 2030 agenda, that we're acknowledging that we need guardrails around the technology that is obviously going going to be our future today. And we were looking at peace and security and the international financial architecture. So coming to the G20 at this time, all of this has to underpin the urgency of having a proper response to this. And what better place than in Africa and with the leadership of South Africa.
You mentioned the peace and security framework that the pact sought to address. Conflicts, of course, might not be, or resolving conflicts might not be the remit of the G20, but it certainly cannot achieve its goals if we do not find peace in places like Sudan, in Eastern Congo, and the list goes on, Gaza, Ukraine. What is the role of the G20 in that regard?
I think to loud and clear to say the enabling environment is not fit for us to invest these monies in, and surely the peace dividend would be more money investing in development. And so I think they've got a big role to play in being a reason for why we need to come to peace, silence the guns, and that the investments would be there, that the architecture for finance will allow us to access capital fairly and squarely around the world, and that Africa is a place where if you could silence the guns in Sudan today, they were already on a trajectory for a lot of progress when we came to investing in the SDGs, and that's what we need now. We don't need to see the burden of conflict on the shoulders of women and children.
Let me ask you a final question, and perhaps the toughest one. Let's talk about geopolitical fluidity, perhaps in the vein that you're witnessing now between Russia and the United States as it relates to finding peace in Ukraine. What does geopolitical fluidity mean to the consensus-driven approach of the G20? There'll be a lot of Europeans in the room around that table in South Africa. How might that disposition play itself out?
I think with a lot of this comes the uncertainty, the unpredictability of situations, of allies who are not sure now which way they're looking and to what. And I think the framing that we have for many of our discussions in this multilateral institution should help to bring some stability to that discourse. What we have right now is we've moved away from the global town hall where we should be having those discussions to keep us together. And that in itself, I think, creates a lot of anxiety.
Unilateralism creates a lot of anxiety.
A lot of anxiety. It is a multipolar world, and we still need multilateralism. So the multi and two of them make sense for us, particularly those that would otherwise not have the visibility on their issues. And in, as they say, dark places, horrible things happen, and they're happening in daylight. So can you imagine if we didn't have us coming together on these issues that are so important? Finance is a big one because it means we're trying to invest in human dignity. We're trying to invest in a fairer world. But without us coming around and really looking at the issues that we agree with, and there are many things that have happened out of this institution, the United Nations, and to try to battle the things that we're not agreeing with right now. And there are many of those too. There is a shifting geopolitical state that we're in. Yes, we are seeing a lot more emerging markets come, populations, the capacity to engage with trade and with the economy, and that makes people nervous. So it's almost as though we got a rebirth, and that rebirthing is pretty painful right now. But we will get through to it, and there'll be a new dawn.
By eating good food in South Africa, I believe?
I believe so.
DSG, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Safe travels. The DSG will leave here to board a plane to South Africa and attend the Foreign Ministers meeting in Nasrec, Johannesburg, February 19th and the 20th.